please join me in a welcome Rick Potts. Thank you.
Wow, the Phillies. I don't know if I want to go there these days. In any case, what a fantastic welcome we've had in Pueblo. And, people ask, well, how did you pick Pueblo? And all I can say is that Maria and her staff and the community panel put together this application that knocked it out of the park. It was a competitive process of libraries, from invitations to libraries all over the country. And we had funding for 19, and Pueblo came out right at the top. It was a spectacular thing, and I thank them, and I thank you all, and so really great. So as Maria said, it's part of Exploring Human Origins is the initial piece of a tour around the country with the goal of trying to promote conversation about a challenging subject. The discoveries about human origins that come from digging in the ground and archaeological discoveries, and that come from the studies of genetics. This is a absolutely compelling field to many, many people, but at the same time it can be troubling to members of this community and communities across the country. And so our goal is to help nurture a respectful and open conversation about that, and that's what we're here to try to do. It's great to also see the variety of programs that the library has developed on this subject while the exhibit is here, and even before, I understand, for months before the exhibit got here. And so now I know why you're all here. This snowball has been rolling for a while. So that's just really, really terrific. The theme of the exhibit is not an answer. It's a question. It's the question, what does it mean to be human? And that's a pretty compelling and profound question. And as part of our effort to try to promote conversation, I'm going to take a few minutes in a little while from now to ask your ideas. We'll just take a few minutes to do that, so not everyone can necessarily get their answer or their reply into that. But put your thinking caps on, and I'm going to ask that question in a few minutes, just to get some of the variety of views and perspectives that are here in the audience. The subject of human evolution, as I said, is both compelling as well as challenging for people. The question, what does it mean to be human, suggests that there's more than just science that informs that question. That it is a question that is informed by religious perspectives, by philosophical reflection, by the books that we read, literature, the arts in general. It's a question that is informed by values and ethics that we learn as we grow up, and by everyday experiences that help us, maybe we don't know it at the time, but when we think about it, focus in on a particular thing, about particular ideas about our own humanity and how we understand ourselves, or how we come to understand ourselves. And scientific discoveries can also help provide some interesting new information that can also be incorporated into our thinking when asking and trying to think about that question. And so again, the goal is to promote, is to nurture, with your help, a respectful and open conversation about this challenging and profound subject. And so to that end, as Maria mentioned, tomorrow in the evening, beginning at 6:30, we'll have a community conversation, and we mean it as a conversation that we will facilitate it. And Jim Miller and Connie Bertka, Brianna Pobener, the three members of our team who are here, and I will be facilitating, but we also learn a lot from the conversation that goes on during those times, and we hope that you will as well. Also, I should say that we know that we made a really good selection with the Pueblo Library, given the food. I mean, this is amazing. Food offered at the community conversation, and we had food this morning for a clergy tour, and there are cookies back there, so we're really happy so far. And thinking about food, as you'll hear later in my presentation, is part of what it means to be human. We think a lot about it. In any case, so I'd like to open the floor to a few people who would like to offer an idea. Raise your hand about what do you think? What do you think about when you hear the question, what does it mean to be human? Yes, please.
Well, one of my impressions is that this could be a real challenge to folks who have based their identity on a patriarchal religion, using a creator known as a god that put us on this earth. I think that'd be very troubling for some people.
Mm-hmm. Right. The answer was actually more of a voicing of a concern about the way in which this topic may challenge and may highlight for some people aspects or areas of conflict with their religious understandings and perceptions of the world. I think that's a very fair statement. I think that in the community conversation tomorrow, we'll actually get into some of the ways in which one might get beyond the conflict mode on those sorts of questions. Yes, please, sir.
One thing to me that means for being human is that every man, woman, and child on earth is my relative and deserves my respect.
Oh, that's a great one. So let me repeat that if I can, although that was really eloquent. I don't think I can quite capture it, but what it means to be human is that every man, woman, and child on earth is my relative, his relative, your relative, and therefore deserves our respect. And that was a fair statement of exactly. That's a wonderful reflection. Yes, please.
Well, along those lines, yeah, if you're a Homo sapien, then you're a human being. You further qualify it when we open the door to division.
When we open the door to division?
If you qualify what it means to be human by what somebody else says, or if you can or can't love, or if you have a certain relationship with other people, it only opens the door to dividing humans amongst each other.
Right. This is a really important interest and concern that we find wherever we go across the country, is this tension between the unity of our species and the common heritage that we all have over a vast period of time relative to the divisions that people often see as defining themselves. Yes, please.
I think one of the things that separates humans from other living things is just having thought and language.
Yeah, thought and language is a distinguishing human characteristic, distinguishing us from other forms of life. Yeah, that's an important one. I'll try to actually address some of that in some of my later comments. That's great. That's great. Another idea, one or two thoughts? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Having a conscience.
Having a conscience. Yeah, that's right. Having a sense of awareness of self and relationship with others and what we might be doing that affects other people. I think that's part of having a conscience is about, a sense of values, ethics, morality that are very much wrapped up with our being human. One other idea? Don't be shy. Yes, please, ma'am. We bury our dead, yes. We have a sense of ritual, not only about our dead, the dead, but we retain a sense of connection with people that after they're gone. That's right, yes.
I think just having the capacity to question who we are, where we came from, and what it means to be human.
You're right. So the very question itself, the capacity to think about ourselves, that gets back to not conscience, but consciousness and awareness about ourselves. That's great. All of those are fantastic questions, and we're going to dive more into this tomorrow for those of you who can come. And also, we have, as part of the introduction to the exhibit, these sticky notes that you can put on the board with your ideas. And sometimes people put a single word on those sticky notes and put it on the board. Sometimes they write almost a PhD dissertation on those sticky notes. But in any case, we find them always profound and interesting, and actually many times fun to read, and we record them all. And we'll be putting them on a web page devoted directly to Pueblo and to the other libraries on our website. And speaking of our website, here is a part of the homepage of it, and it's humanorigins.si.edu, and everyone has a web page and things like this. But if you want to dive into further into some of this information, recommend going to that. There's not only extensive content on research on human origins, we also have 3D access to all of the objects that not only are portrayed as flat images here, but are in the Hall of Human Origins that we opened in 2010 at the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian. And we also have resources developed by what we call our broader social impacts team or committee. And Jim and Connie, who have already been introduced, are and who will be helping to facilitate tomorrow, are the co-chairs of that group. And that's a group of about 15 people right now, of people representing and reflective of different faith denominations from around the country and the world, or academics who are interested in this relationship between science, religion, and variety of philosophical perspectives. And so we have information on the website also for that, for those who would like to dive further in. Well, this is how I spend my life, and much of it, about 3 months out of the year, 2 to 3 months out of the year these days. Used to be more like 3 to 6 months before I got busy at the Smithsonian. Actually, this is in the southern Kenya Rift Valley, and this is the unpronounceable name, Olorgesailie. It's in Maasai country. The Maasai people live here and have welcomed us onto their land for well over 30 years. 30 years of excavating and exploring the geology, and you can see the many, many layers that go back through time, and that represent, actually, when you put from different parts of this whole region together, a little bit more than 1 million years of time of uncovering fossils and stone artifacts. We go to places like this because nature does the first excavating. We don't. We go to badlands areas, places where there are layers and layers that were laid down in lake margins and along streams, low-lying ground, which was then lifted up due to earthquake activity, that the ground moves. And that since this area right here that you're seeing, this vast area, was lifted up, wind and water has eroded away. And so we go walking around and we find where there are exposed fossils and archaeological sites, and then we go in and help a little bit and open up further excavations and find them in the actual landscapes ancient landscapes in which those remains were preserved. And so actually you can see my home away from home. That's our tented camp up there, which we put up every June or July. People ask, do you go to the summer there for a particular reason, maybe the weather? And I say, yes, definitely the weather. I want to get out of a Washington, D.C. summer. But it also happens to be the dry season there. So when we open up an excavation, we don't get a lot of rain on the things that we're finding. Many of the fossil bones are, of course, very fragile as well. And so this gives an idea of some of the ways in which we excavate. This happens to be an example from Olorgesailie of a fossil elephant, an extinct form of elephant, in a layer that's almost exactly 1 million years old. There's the jaw, lower jaws down there, and the ribs, and there were a little bit over 2,300 sharp stone artifacts around it, and we found the butchery marks on the ribs and the vertebrae, and it was a real, as you can imagine, bonanza of meat and protein and fat that was found. And we actually know that from the digging in this layer over many miles, that it was a time when it was a vast grassland area during a very dry time, and perhaps had its own challenges. And to be able to forage for food and find things, and to use the simple stone implements that were used at that time was quite an important thing. This is an excavation that we're right in the middle of doing. We opened up last July, and actually got to the point where it got to the end of the field season, and we found this gigantic, the largest fossil lion jaw skull that had ever been found, and we had to rebury it. But we know how to do that. We'll go back there in July and get it out of the ground. But we're interested not only in the activities of early humans and how they lived and what were the survival challenges they faced, but we're also interested in the fossils of the whole environments in which they lived, and trying to understand what I often say, we'd like to put these early humans in their place. In other words, in the ecological systems, the habitats in which they lived. This is a couple of shots of some of my excavation teams. It's an international endeavor. This is from a team from, well, both of these are shots from southern Kenya. Also do work, as Maria mentioned, on Lake Victoria in Kenya, and a shot of two of my excellent field research colleagues in China, northern China. That was in November. What a stupid time to go to northern China. It was cold, but nonetheless, we did some really good geology at that point. And you know, these are people who come, the teams. They come from different nations. They have different languages. They come from different cultural and religious backgrounds. And science is a way of communicating findings about the world that are able to cut across and unify the different perspectives that people have and the different cultural backgrounds that people have. And so we all work in a very, very cooperative way in order to carry this out. And I've been very fortunate to have our research teams, many of which are quite large, many different sciences involved, to be welcomed into these countries. Right, this is one that I sometimes hesitate to show in a library. This is my office. And as you can imagine, books are almost always on those shelves. In fact, always. There was one day before we opened the exhibit at the Smithsonian where a really great photographer and friend of mine came in and took all of the books off of my bookshelves and put the objects that were going into the Hall of Human Origins at the Smithsonian on the shelves and on a table that's in my office. And well, all I can say is that the books have never gotten back into their right place ever since. But anyway, I guess I need a librarian, a really good one. The finds shown here show a variety of the fossil skulls and skeletal remains that have been found. Of course, the original objects stay in the country of origin, but we have really great relationships with all those institutions whereby we can get exact molds and casts, exact replicas of them. We do have in the exhibit at the Smithsonian the only original fossil skeleton of a Neanderthal in North America. And so, but it takes very, very special security and things like that to be able to display original fossils. But we have many original archaeological remains. We have thousands and thousands of individuals represented that relate to the subject of human evolution in the display shown, some of them shown in the display here and shown in the exhibit at the Smithsonian. And when you couple that with what I like to sometimes call the business cards, the calling cards that they left behind, the stone tools that says, I was here and I made this, those represent millions and millions of objects from around the world, dating back, and the fossil record of human origins dates back to about 6 million years, where we see evidence of walking upright on 2 legs and the having small canine teeth, eye teeth, in both males and females. Those are the 2 characteristics that we look for to say that this is probably a skeleton, a fossil skull, or whatever that is associated with our ancestry or with our the cousins in our family tree or evolutionary tree. We also have animal bones that I mentioned before that we excavate, and some of them have cut marks, butchery marks on the bones, whereby we can tell something about the diet of early humans. And my colleague Brianna Popiner is an expert. That's one of her areas of research expertise, as well as being our specialist in education and outreach in this area. And we also have archaeological evidence of hearths, of being able to cook food, for example, and of symbolic artifacts. This one right here happens to be the world's oldest known, it's only 20,000 years old, but it's the world's oldest known artist's palette, where pigment was rubbed onto the palette, or ground, I should say, onto the palette. And then it was actually, what's been found is that the pigment was not wetted. There was no moisture on the palate itself, but rather the pigment was introduced into the mouth, mixed with the saliva and spat onto cave walls, which is the only way in which things like those famous handprints have ever been replicated. And so it's a kind of interesting sort of, there's an experimental side to this field as well, figuring out how they did it long, long, long ago. It is also a field that is constantly involving new finds, new discoveries. It's a very, very vibrant field. And we have a couple of them represented on one of the panels there called What's Hot in Human Origins. And again, you can go to the website and see even newer things of what's been going on in the study of human origins. This particular one, which got the cover of the journal Science, were 2 skeletons of a relatively newly named fossil species, Australopithecus sediba, dating back to nearly 2 million years ago. I understand that you've already had here in the community a talk about Homo naledi, which was one of the other fossils that come from South Africa. This one comes from South Africa, and Homo naledi is a more recently published one just late last year, October of last year. And still very much of a head scratcher. Whenever something new like that comes in, there are lots of questions that emerge, and it takes sometimes years to get more information, new geological studies and things to kind of figure out where they fit into the whole narrative of human origins. In addition to that, I think one of the things that's most exciting development in the subject of human origins is that we can get DNA out of fossil bones. And you may all be aware of the Human Genome Project, that the human genome, genetics, has been mapped and sequenced. And we know that quite well, but it's still many, many, many years of studying it. But there's now also a Neanderthal Genome Project. And from fragments of Neanderthal bones, where the Neanderthals lived in Ice Age conditions of Europe and the Near East. And it's from those that are northernmost, where the fossils were also preserved in caves, where the DNA was not entirely destroyed. And so that has been able, scientists have found a way to extract that and to figure out and put together and to sequence the Neanderthal genome. And of course, one of the interesting things that some of you may know is that for those populations of Homo sapiens that first dispersed beyond the African continent, we all have Homo sapiens has an African origin, and every person on the face of the earth bears the echo of that African ancestry. But for those who, around 60,000 years ago, began to disperse, and you can trace the genetic variations, and some of you may have even done these genealogical things where you do send in swabs from inside your mouth and you can get your DNA sequenced, that the people outside of Africa ended up having a small amount, those small groups initially had some small amount of mating with Neanderthals. And that those of us who also have an origin, not an origin, but had ancestors that were outside of Africa, have about 2% on average of fragments of DNA in our cells. And there's a whole slew of things that could be discussed about that. But it's a fascinating area of interest to people in understanding and piecing together the narrative of human origins. And so the exhibit invites you to explore these major milestones in the accumulation of characteristics of our species, evidence of the accumulation of human qualities over time. In just a few of the objects here, I see that you have a floor mat out there where you can actually walk in a replication of the earliest known fossil footprints that go back to around 3.6 million years ago, discovered by the famed paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey and her team in the late 1970s, where 3 individuals actually walked along a volcanic landscape that had cooled. But you can even see fossilized raindrops in that ancient landscape, and the footprints of other animals, and 3 bipeds went walking along. When you look at it out there, you may say, wait, I see only 2 tracks. One of the individuals was actually stepping in the footprints of the other. What a human gesture that is. I'm going to follow? I don't know, in any case, but it's really, really pretty cool. We have, just with 5 skulls here, 2.5 million years from this one over here on the left to Homo sapiens, a representative, of course, of our species on the right. And in those you can see changes in these few examples, changes in the size of the brain, increase in the size of the brain, decrease in the size of the face. The characteristic of Homo sapiens is that we're the only mammal where the face is tucked in under the front of the brain case. The face is so small and the brain case so expanded that's how we recognize our own species in the fossil record. Also, about 2.5 million years of technology represented in just a few objects. Some of these very old and most ancient simple flaking, purposeful flaking of a pattern of scars along a lava implement, and the flakes that flew off were very sharp and actually show edge abrasion that shows how they were used and what they were used on. Hand axe technology, which persisted for more than 1.5 million years. I can't imagine the technology lasting that long. I mean, I can't keep up with Windows, you know. But in any case, hand axes were around for a really long time. I think of them as the Swiss Army knife of the Paleolithic, of the Stone Age. They were good for a lot of different things. And then sort of representing human innovation, the earliest known sewing needles, which were made out of ivory. These come from a site in China dated to about 32,000 years ago. And then the explosion of art and symbolic evidence that we have toward the end of the story. In addition, we've learned that our family tree, our evolutionary tree of relationships, involves lots of different species now. You may remember, in fact, you may still see that old picture of going from ape-like to human-like in a line. That's been thrown out for decades, and you must know that. And our family tree has become branching, and the more we've studied, it's branching and diverse like the evolutionary trees of most other organisms. And yet, these other ones that are known from the fossil record, and you can again explore in the exhibit how long they are known to have survived from basis of discoveries so far, that they represent ways of life that are now no longer around. Many of them had at least slightly enlarged brains to actually very enlarged brains. Many of them made tools. Some of them, like the Neanderthals, also showed evidence of occasionally at least symbolic burial. And yet these are ways of life that are now no longer around, despite their the fraction at least of human qualities that they had. And so I like to sometimes say that, well, we're the last biped standing. We're the last two-legged member of this group of organisms that's left standing, and it gives a certain sense of responsibility, I think, to recognize this fragility that's been uncovered in the study of human origins. It's also interesting to see that this record, again going back to 6 million years, there's a timeline over here, 6 million years to the present. And these are different groups of fossil species that are known. We belong to the Homo group, as in we are Homo sapiens, as we call ourselves. But it shows that Homo sapiens, we all, everyone, and this goes back to a comment that was earlier, that we share this long 6 million year heritage. Every human being today shares this long 6 million year heritage of becoming human that in a way makes pale in comparison the time period of often hundreds of years over which we have developed our sense of differences and divisions from one another. And I think that's also an interesting thing to contemplate. Humans connect with the rest of the history of life in the group known as the primates. It's been recognized well before there was any contemplation about evolution that we are primates. And this shows photos of our closest living genetic relative, a cousin of ours, not an ancestor, but chimpanzees in Africa. This is a famous photograph of the famed primatologist Jane Goodall reaching to one of her friends. And she met in Tanzania in the field at Gombe Stream. And from Western Africa, a mother, a sense showing offspring, this process of using a tool, an anvil, and a hammer to crack nuts. Nuts that are very hard, nuts that can't be cracked with the teeth, but they use stones that they find in the vicinity of these trees to crack nuts. And it takes about 2 years for a chimpanzee to learn how to do this. It wouldn't be very hard for us to learn it, but it takes about 2 years and shows that it's a learned activity. And not all chimpanzees do this. They do it only in certain groups. And so anyway, the study of other primates and the genetics of primates helps us to understand that we are not only kin to everyone else on the face of the earth, but this kinship extends beyond. This sense of connectedness or relatedness to all other organisms on the face of the earth, and that's one of the cornerstones of our thinking about evolution and human origins and the origins of the diversity of life on Earth. This idea of connectedness is not an idea that is embraced by or liked by everyone, but many people, including of deep religious conviction, find this idea of our kinship with all other forms of life as a significant and beautiful thing to learn. Now, the idea of change over time makes sense. It could have been that when the idea of evolution was first contemplated, that we would have found that Earth's history was largely one that was stable and unchanging. But the environmental sciences have found quite a different view of this. We live on a very dynamic Earth. There have been times you're all familiar with asteroid impacts that affect the extinction of organisms, such as the dinosaurs, about 65 to 66 million years ago, well before any evidence of mammalian evolution and humans as part of it. And the last 6 million years, I know you can't see this in the back, or maybe even in the second or third row, but this says 7 million years to the present from left to right. And this is just one of the iconic environmental records that comes from coring in the deep sea, where a record of, in this case, warm and cold glacial or non-glacial and glacial conditions on the face of the Earth have been recorded in the microscopic organisms that are found in the deep sea. In Africa, where many of the benchmarks and milestones of human evolutionary history are recorded, that it's not cold and warm, it's wet and dry fluctuations. But these have been also quite dramatic. Again, slow relative to the sorts of things people are talking about today with regard to environmental change. But nonetheless, we live on a very dynamic planet, and perhaps that helps to explain why the factors going on today, including ourselves, are able to pull and tug on those strings and make some fairly dramatic changes or prospects for change, because we live on that dynamic planet, this dynamic planet. And so as the conditions of life changed, with shifts in food and water and shelter that could be found, it makes sense that adaptations, new appearances, new ways of life could develop as benefits in those changing and novel settings. Well, one of the characteristics of adaptations in the study of human origins, but also in the evolution of other organisms, is that yes, things develop the way they do because of the benefits that they provided to living organisms, including our ancestors. But they also came with disadvantages, that these adaptations were good, but they weren't perfect. And for those of you who can think about walking around on two legs, freeing the hands, isn't that great? We get to do things with our hands, and you know, there's a lot of advantages in carrying things across the landscape. But for those of you who also experience back pain and fallen arches and the implications of putting all the body weight from 4 legs onto 2, there are some costs, some disadvantages to that. Another one with regard to eating meat, rich source of protein and fat, really important with the energy sources to grow a large brain, which I'll get into in a moment. It's quickly digested, but it contains parasites, it spoils, it can upset your stomach, and it leads you, and it led our early ancestors who were first engaged in stone tool making and getting meat off of bones into this dangerous realm of carnivores. At our fossil site that I showed you earlier, Olorgesailie, we found a fossil skull of an early human that is about 900,000 years old. And we kept wondering, gee, you know, we found the brow ridge, we found the region around the ear, and we found bits and pieces of the brain case, but we were really looking for the rest of the face. And we got back to Nairobi and we cleaned the fossil, and there on the upper brow were 2 bite marks made by a hyena. And so, you know, perhaps this individual, we knew a little bit how it met its demise and why we couldn't find the rest of it. In any case, one of my most interesting to me examples about these advantages or benefits and disadvantages of evolution happens to do with speaking. Well, just think what we do with speaking. We're able to communicate with one another. We're able to pass on our plans and our ideas to other people. What could be disadvantageous about speaking? Well, in our political climate, you might think of some, but trying to leave that aside. What I'm thinking about is actually that in order to produce all of those amazing range of sounds that people produce while speaking, that our voice box around the age of 2 drops low into the throat. And it helps us to modulate all of those vowels and consonants in that rapid way that is quintessential for how we speak to one another in speaking language. And you may be familiar, some of you at least, that a baby up to about the age of 2 can nurse and breathe at the same time. They can swallow and breathe at the same time. But when the voice box descends, you can't do that anymore. So what's the disadvantage? We're the only mammal that can die by choking on our own food, by suffocating. Now that's quite an amazing disadvantage to have, but the overwhelming advantage of speaking clearly outweighed that amazing and potentially fatal disadvantage. So anyway, we have a panel out in the exhibit that reflects some of that. Now I've mentioned quite a bit about dating so far, or the age of things. And you might wonder, well, how in the world can we know that? Fieldwork is absolutely critical to understand the layers that are laid down one after another, representing a course of time and different environments that define the different layers. And in this, it says here, I'll read this down at the bottom, it says this is from that field site in southern Kenya, and that this particular hillside represents from about 670,000 years ago. I know these are vast numbers. I throw them around easily, but I realize they're vast numbers. 670,000 years at the bottom based on a volcanic ash that can be dated because it has radioactive particles that decay in a clock-like way. And at the top is about 633,000 years ago. Again, another volcanic ash that erupted and that we can date through that same technique. And by putting together the different hillsides from around, all of which that have been raised up or lowered down based on faulting, geological faulting, we put together this record that's more than 1 million years long. And by looking broadly over East Africa, we put together this record that's 6 million years and longer than that. And so the variety of dating techniques, there are about 12 different, about a dozen different dating techniques that are applied to the time period of human origins. And they are reliable tests that measure, and these tests measure, as I mentioned before, radioactive decay of chemical elements. They can count the electrons that are trapped over time inside of rocks and sediments. You can compare the magnetic particles in the layers of sediment with shifts in the Earth's magnetic field, which are well known over time in Earth's history. And as I mentioned with regard to having genomes, not only in living creatures, but also increasingly in fossils, you can compute rates of genetic changes that also help to understand the timing of this whole narrative. And so when you put the matters of time and the fossil discoveries and archaeological discoveries together, MA here represents millions of years ago, and what's down here at the bottom, it says 6 to 2 million years ago. Bipedal walking and tree climbing is that those early ancestors combined not only walking upright on 2 legs, but also long, powerful arms and hands with curved fingers that showed that they were also very active and retained the ability to climb trees, active in the trees and could climb them quite easily, had adaptations for that. We have an increase in the diversity of foods eaten between 3 and 4 million years ago. Simple stone flaking as a persistent aspect of our behavior and a reliance on stone technology by a little over 2.5 million years ago. Extensive carrying of food, 2 million. Elongation of the legs, that meant long distance walking and pursuing of new environments. Back to almost 2 million years ago. Advances in stone technology, those hand axes come in a little bit earlier than 1.7 million years ago. And then I decided to just sort of jump ahead to the last 1 million years, and Ka represents thousands of years ago. So the most rapid increase in brain size, the brain size relative to the size of the body, has occurred over the last 800,000 years. Between 800,000 years and the origin of our species, about 200,000 years ago. Controlling a fire, building of shelters, 800 to 400,000 years ago. The ability to exchange valuable rocks and other resources over long distances. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. By 250,000 years ago, symbolic behavior. And then it's really only been over the last 100,000 years, only over the last 100,000 years, where we see this diversity or diversification of tools and technologies and of different cultures in different parts of the world, different parts of Africa and then different parts of the world. So these are some of the main ideas and messages and themes that you can see in the exhibit, Exploring Human Origins. And I personally invite you to, if you haven't already, and even if you have, to continue to look at the panels, contemplate these ideas, and see if they make sense to you. Now, what I'd like to do in the remaining time is just to present 3 short vignettes, recent research discoveries that I think provide some really interesting insights about our human qualities. And so let me go through them. And these are sharing and caring, the human brain, babies and parenting, how they're related, and then innovations, symbolism, and social networking. So let's do sharing and caring. You know, for the variety of interesting ideas that you have mentioned about what does it mean to the question, what does it mean to be human, and that I've heard as I've gone around the country and that we see on our website and people enter into our exhibit at the Smithsonian, their ideas about this. My favorite, or one of my favorites, maybe not the favorite, but one of my favorites is represented here. And that is that when we go looking for food, we don't eat it right away. At least when I go to the grocery store, I hardly ever just sit down and start ripping open packages and eating. I don't know about you, but I don't tend not to do that. But instead, what we do is that rather than eat it right away, which is what most organisms do, yes, indeed, there are birds that can take worms back to the nest. There's the feeding of young that can occur at dens and nests and things. But we usually have, or we often have, an expectation of bringing it to others with the ideas of sharing it. And we do this not just with young, we do it with other adults. We even can do it with people we don't even know. Give food to people we don't know. And so this is, I think, one of the more amazing aspects and distinctive aspects of our behavior when you look at us from the standpoint of other forms of life. So the question is, can we figure out any time, any evidence about when this might have occurred, when this might have cropped up in the prehistoric record? And we, not only our research team working in Western Kenya, but other research teams have been finding evidence of the same thing in other parts of East Africa, that by about 2 million years ago, we do indeed see evidence of this, that we see evidence not only of an early toolkit that consists of hammerstones, things you hit with, cores, the things you strike, and the flakes, the things that fly off that are very sharp, a very simple toolkit. But we also have evidence of a change in diet that's rich in meat and tubers, that we have evidence of cut marks on bones, we have polish on the edges of stone tools that has only been able to be replicated by stripping the tough covering of roots and tubers. So we have evidence about the vegetarian aspect or the vegetable plant aspect of the diet as well now. But we also see this carrying of stones and food over long distances, up to 8 miles. We first recognized this with the stones. We could see where the outcrops of stone occur, and that there are no closer outcrops occur, but they were actually transporting things away when they found them to these places on the landscape. And we also have evidence of the animals that they were bringing. The butchered animals represent many different kinds of environments, not just the environments right here. And so we have evidence that when these ancestors or cousins, relatives, predecessors of ours who were basic stone tool makers 2 million years ago were not eating food right away and were taking it someplace else, probably with the idea of sharing it or bringing it together where other members of the social group were also. And so this is, again, an example of the early toolkit. You know, I was reading, just as an aside, a book about a couple weeks ago where the author who had studied this said that some of the countries in Europe, the average person owns about 10,000 objects. I thought that's interesting to read a number about it. Americans probably own more on average, but in any case, we own a lot of things. We make a lot of things. We get them and we keep them. Sometimes we discard them away. That, by the way, was the origin of the archaeological record, throwing things away. And so we can see kind of like the roots of that behavior of making things and having things. In these kinds of early tools. Actually, this kind of tool goes back to a little bit over 2.5 million years ago. These are two examples that are closer to 2 million years ago. But just think that with a hammerstone, you could crush more effectively than an elephant's molar. And with a sharp stone tool, you could cut more effectively than a lion's canine tooth. And so with that simple act, with these simple tools, the whole realm of resources of the African woodlands and grasslands were opened up with this simple invention of these simple stone tools. And again, it's the patterning that is seen, the geological context, that these are not places where we find them, where natural stones are knocking together that could also flake a stone. So these are gentle lake margin environments where there's lots of these things. You can actually refit the flakes back on the artifacts to see how the hammerstone struck them. And so as simple as these look, these were powerful, this is the powerful root of our reliance on technology. And so armed with these simple tools and with the capacity to take food elsewhere and probably to share it, that by about a little bit less than 2 million years ago, the early members of our genus, probably the species Homo erectus, was the first to disperse, the first that we know so far, to spread out of the African continent. Our teams working in Asia show that they were spread across a wide diversity of environments, from 40 degrees north latitude to 7 degrees south, across many different biological zones, habitats, climate zones, things like this. And so there's this emerging adaptability that we see in the early members of our genus. One site that I'd like to focus in just very briefly, one fossil specimen from there. There have been there are 5 published skeletons of early humans that go back to actually about 1.8 million years ago. There are stone tools that go a little bit further back in time, 1.85 million, 1,850,000 years ago. But the fossils of Homo erectus, early Homo erectus, are about 1.8 million. And this particular one has drawn a lot of interesting attention, and it's shown out there in our fossil display, that the big panel of fossil skulls. And what do you notice about this individual? No teeth, yeah. And it's not no teeth because someone punched him or that the teeth fell out at death. The bone is actually resorbed. He lost the teeth during life. And forensic scientists and dentists and all, have looked at this and go, this is an individual who had lost his teeth, and we know it's a he because we have this much of the skeleton. No, it's a male individual, a fairly decrepit individual, arthritis in aspects of the body. And this individual has lost his teeth about 5 to 8 years before he died. Could not chew food. And so this appears to be the earliest evidence we have in the prehistoric record of someone taking care, or some group taking care of another individual, all the way back that far in the past. And so it makes you wonder, I think, is this the reflective of the roots of a sense of social responsibility and caring for others? And this idea of social responsibility and caring is something that's is quintessentially human in many ways. Another example that's shown in the same panel in the exhibit, but the story isn't told the way I've just told that story, is much later in time, 65,000 years ago, from Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, from a cave in Iraq, northern Iraq, that was excavated in the 1950s. And this particular, again, we have much of the skeleton. These show the upper arm bones of the individual. And the individual had received, at a young age, probably about the age of 8 years old, a blow to the left side of the head. And it clearly had affected the left side of the brain, the motor cortex, the things that help you move. And the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and vice versa. And so this trauma to the left side of the skull, a healed fracture, permanently affected the brain and the ability of the individual to move. And so even though you're seeing it, the left side, it's his right side of the body that was completely withered. And you can compare the right upper arm bone to the left upper arm bone to his right upper arm bone. And the same thing with his leg and things like this. Around the age of 8, he was not able to move around and really participate in the foraging of his group, he lived to about 45 years of age. And so this is another example of a social group and individuals in the social group being cared for. And so this sense of social responsibility, this sense of social living, caring, that for many of us lies pretty near the center of our being human, can be something that can be discovered and in these sorts of studies of the fossil record of human origins. The second one, brain, babies, and parenting. Let's begin with babies. And all babies are fat. That's one fact I can definitely tell you. They have a form of fat that's actually a little bit different from what I'm increasingly growing. Our fat in adults is white fat. The fat in babies is a much greater proportion of what's called brown fat, which is a very high proportion of mitochondria in the cells, in the fat cells. And mitochondria are the power stations of our cells. They are the ones that generate, the mitochondria generate the energy of the cell and therefore the energy of the tissue. And why do babies need to have so much fat storage of brown fat and that high energy production aspects? It's because of their brains. Their brains, a baby will, just when sitting around, which is largely what they do. No, anyway, when they're sitting around, they, at rest, the brain consumes about 65% of the metabolism of the oxygen that's consumed. And in adults, it's about 20%. If all you're doing is phasing out right now, no, I shouldn't say that, but your brain is still using 20% of your oxygen. It's only 2% of our body weight, but 20% of our energy just at rest. That's not a good deal when it comes to an organ of the body, but our brains certainly are good for things in all sorts of ways about problem solving, and they're, in a sense, our organ of flexibility and being able to learn and to function in a social context, and all the different ways about abstraction, computation, social awareness, values and beliefs, all these things that we think are that are contained in our brain, but which we share. I like to think of our brain. My brain is right now also belonging to you, and that yours, I hope, belongs to me. Is that we share our mental lives with one another, and that takes a lot of power of the brain and size of the brain and differences in connectivity of the brain in order for us to do this and the amazing ways that humans do this. Use our brains. And it also means that we depend upon a wider range of caretakers. All of us to have reached the age at which we are, as children, we needed caretakers, people who nurtured us. And many of you I know in the audience are also equal nurturers of others. And so this is an absolutely important part, and particularly the dependence upon older individuals to help in the process of taking care of young individuals. And so growing up human, when we compare ourselves again with our closest living biological or genetic relative, chimpanzees, that we have a far longer span of growing up. I sometimes say we live life in the slow lane, that we have a much longer period, prolonged period of growing up than our closest relatives. We have a brain that takes a long time to grow and is energetically expensive. Growing up takes longer. We have a prolonged period of childhood. We have adolescence, for better or for worse. In other words, a growth spurt. And we have grandparents, too. Now, one thing about this chart, which is also in the exhibit that I don't like, is that old age begins at 50. No, that's not. Yeah, you can, please don't go up with a Sharpie and mark it out on the exhibit. It needs to go to other libraries, but in any way, it made me think about this. And actually, there was a study that was published, a genetic study that was published a couple of, I guess about 3 months ago, only 3 months ago. So it's fairly hot off the presses. That identified one of the key genes that is unique to human beings and that functions to hinder mental decline past reproductive age. And it's a uniquely human gene in all the primates. They tested 79 different species of primates. They also tested Neanderthals. The Neanderthals don't have this gene. And this genetic variation had enormous consequences of being able to have grandmothers and grandfathers who can contribute mentally to the raising and care of young, and also to provide a wealth of knowledge to the group. And in almost all other mammals, adults die very soon after average reproductive age of females concludes. But that's not the case in our own species. And it doesn't even seem to have been the case in Neanderthals. And so that may have been one of the defining things about that differentiated us as a survivor when the Neanderthals didn't make it, is the ability to accumulate knowledge due to having the wonder of grandparents. Well, you might wonder, can we tell when that slowing down occurred, that prolonging of life, of growing up occurred? And the answer was figured out by dentists, because they study teeth. And it turns out, of course, that our teeth start to grow while we're in the womb, while a child is in the womb. And as a result of that, there have been detailed studies by those dentists, but also now many, many other scientists, of the microscopic detail of teeth and how they grow. And this is a microscopic view of a bit of tooth enamel. And it has growth lines, and those lines of enamel, the buildup of enamel, is laid down a day at a time. It's on a 24-hour cycle. One day, then another day, and then another day. And so what we have is a timekeeper of tooth growth in our mouths. Not just human beings, but all mammals, all things that actually grow teeth, but mammals, it's been studied in considerable detail. And one growth line each day. Well, not only that, but there is within our teeth a signal of the day of birth. There is a birth line when birth is probably the most traumatic thing that organisms, that mammals at least, undertake. And during that day of trauma, during that time of trauma, their growth of their enamel stops. Energy is put into other things. And as a result, there is a dense line in the enamel that reflects the day of birth. And so what does that mean? You can actually count the number of days from birth to the final growth and eruption of that tooth. You can actually count the days. And since teeth and the eruption of teeth is a pretty good indicator of the overall growth and how long it takes in a mammal, a primate, including ourselves, it is actually a way of measuring time and growth. And so we have a birth certificate inside of our molars, inside of our teeth, of the day of birth. I find that just absolutely mind-blowing. Believe it's not my work, but it's the work of colleagues, just brilliant people who have been able to figure this out. And so there's this temporary halting of the layer. You can count the number of days. Well, what's interesting, the reason why I put this one is that this is a 20-million-year-old tooth of a fossil ape, and you can actually see the day of birth reflected 20 million years ago of this particular individual. And so there have been then studies of fossil humans about this to try to figure out, well, what was the tempo of growth in our early ancestors and relatives. Well, first of all, in living primates, including ourselves, that's our species, and then gorilla, chimpanzee, and orangutan, you can see that humans do have, the first molar erupts, again, by counting those lines. We talk about the first molar as being our 6-year-old molar sometimes, and it does. It erupts around 6 years of age, but the first molar in our closest living genetic relatives is earlier. It's a faster pace of growing up. Well, what happens when you look at fossil humans, again with the same thing? Well, these are the time periods of different ones from 3.2 million years ago for Lucy's species, Australopithecus afarensis, and others 2.5 million, 1.7 million, 1 million, 50,000 with the Neanderthals, and present Homo sapiens being the same. And we find that growth was really fast in those early bipeds, those early relatives and ancestors of ours. And it's not until, and so the first molar was erupting around 3 years of age, twice the pace of growing up in Australopithecus compared with us today. And it's not really until the last 1 million years that you see this really, really significant slowing down, including in the Neanderthal lineage, which is kind of interesting. But they also had very large brains. And so that makes sense that their growth was also delayed, similar to ourselves. And so this is pretty neat that we can see that over the last million years, our tempo of growth has changed a lot. Well, what else was going on that we know about early humans during this time period? Well, the earliest evidence of hearths, of control of fire, goes back to about 800,000 years ago, during this time of increasing brain size, the most rapid pace of increasing brain size. We also see evidence of cooking, of burned seeds and actually burned flints from tool making in these hearths in a site in Israel, with also an unpronounceable name. We all call it the GBY site in Israel. And so this importance of cooking and the release of new nutrients to fuel the evolution of a larger brain was going on and a more prolonged life. And we also see by 400,000 years ago clear evidence of the making of more or less, well beyond just a temporary daily nesting site or of a shelter, but a more permanent shelter. And this comes from a site in Terra Amata, this reconstruction where there are post holes and aggregations of stones that help to support the hut, evidence of a hearth inside the hut itself. And so there is this growing sense of safety and protection and the sharing of food at a home base that comes in right around this same time as this rapid increase in brain size and slowing down of the pace of growth. And so this combination of brain size, shelters, control of fire, and slowing down the pace of growth all make sense as real milestones in becoming human. The emergence of qualities that lie near the heart of our experience and our experiences as human beings. Very quickly onto this last one. This one is involving research that's not yet published, not because it's my own, but it is my own. It's my team's, and we're working on manuscripts right now to submit in the next few months. And I thought I'd share this with you before it gets into the scientific literature and the press. But what we are seeing here is evidence of early innovations and social networking. So it takes place again at this site in southern Kenya, our excavations there. And at excavations like this is one of the hillsides where this particular hillside is closer to about 300 to 330,000 years old, the layers in this hillside. And what we see in this site of Alorgis Island in southern Kenya, again, that we've been working on for 30 years, a large scientific team, is that we have, for 700,000 years, 1.2 million to 500,000 years ago, that's a 700,000 year period, layer after layer of the making of these stone hand axes. But by about 310 to 320,000 years ago, we see the beginning of a totally different technology. Hand axes are gone. After all of that time of being around, they're no longer found in any archaeological site of southern Kenya. And we see evidence of this smaller, notice the centimeter marking here. This is a much smaller series of a set of tools and more diversified set of tools. They are able to be carried longer distances. We have evidence of this black stone for the first time that comes from not just within a few kilometers, a few miles, which is what we have during this time period, but rather from up to 60 miles away, and evidence of trade, of exchange with groups that were some distance away. and a really different behavior that we're seeing. That's obsidian rock, a very valuable rock, very, very sharp, but not used. Maybe 1% of the stones we find on archaeological sites in this time period are obsidian from more local sources. More than 50% are obsidian from this trade network that was developing. It's the beginning of social networking. And we also have, with the ability to knock off and very carefully shape a core, with one strike of a hammerstone, there is this ability to create over and over again small triangular points. And these are the first evidence of projectiles, things that fly through the air. And the world has never been the same since. We see damage at the tips of many of these. And not only that, but from these same archaeological sites, we have evidence of the first evidence in Africa of the use of pigments, the accumulation of coloring material, both orange and red ochre pigment, as well as black manganese. And so black and red, the kinds of colors that were used much later in time with cave paintings and things like that. And so what we have then, and this is, sorry you won't see this in the back, but this is just a timeline. You will see it, but it's just a timeline that from 280,000 years ago to 40,000 years ago, with the oldest known Homo sapiens around 200,000 years. And so what we see over this time period is not hand axes after hand axe after hand axe, but a whole series of innovative behaviors that occur in this time period. And what we see is that not only increasing innovation, but wider social networks, trade, symbolic activity. This had to have been included language, some way of communicating over long distances and sharing ideas about where to go and what to value. And also, of course, complex thinking and planning, even as represented by the ways that chess match, if you will, of what move do I make to create these triangular points over and over again. And this suggests a greater capacity to adjust to new environments. And of course, this is the legacy of us, Homo sapiens, and spread all over the world today. And I think that one of the things we're going to be emphasizing in our papers is that we're taking some of these things and we're extending them back into time several tens of thousands of years with interesting implications of that with regard to how it's related to the origin of our species. Well, to get back to this oldest known coloring material, we don't know what they were coloring with it. We see evidence of them processing, of scraping the pigment. We don't know whether they applied it to their bodies, whether they applied it to wood or some other object that did not get preserved. But it does bring up the point that pigments are so, in a sense, symbolic of our symbolic abilities. In other words, color, just think about the uniforms and flags and the things that color is very important to the symbolic things that we communicate with other people. And so this leads then to this slide, which is the oldest known clear evidence of crayons. It's a lumpy sort of crayon. It wouldn't fit very well into a box of 64. But from a site in Zambia, called Twin Rivers, where several dozen of these faceted orange pigments have been found. Oldest known representational art, this may be a little bit hard to see in this light, but a kind of a four-legged, almost human-like creature, but with drawn with four legs, from a site in Africa, in Zimbabwe, a site called Apollo 11 Cave, goes back to 40,000 years ago. These were also made in Europe by Homo sapiens that got there around the same time. This fantastical creature, what's called the Lion Man, and also the oldest known musical instrument. This is a flute. There are several flutes made from swan bones and from even mammoth ivory that was put together. The holes represent a 5-note scale, a pentatonic scale, not the 7-note scale that we have in most Western music, but the pentatonic scale is the type of music that is seen through most of the world. And so really neat. In fact, this has been actually replicated in wood and to figure out what the sound it could make. Early burials, the earliest known burials come from a site in Israel called Kafse of our own species about 100,000 years ago. A little bit later on, not only did our own species continue it, but also Neanderthals sometimes buried their dead with grave goods. And then this one of my favorite stories of all, and I just want to take a moment to tell you this. This comes from a site in France called Chauvet Cave. Maybe some of you have heard of this before. And it's one of these wonderful caves. This one happens to be about 32,000 years old, with these remarkable cave art in it. And the archaeologists, Jean Clot and his colleagues who went in there, first found it, went in, of course, with flashlights. And they shined it on the cave wall and just took their breath away. And they noticed something that they hadn't seen in other cave sites and that confused them. And that there's this kind of overprinting, a woolly rhinoceros where one image is over another, a cave lion where one image is over another. And they couldn't figure out why do that. Were they just practicing? Well, a few months, I believe it was, later, they had some of the members of the Antiquities Department and government officials wanting to see this. What they had heard was a remarkable find. And so Jean Clot and his colleagues thought they'd give them a real Stone Age experience. And they lit torches, flickering torches, and they went in there. They move. The images move. It's the first animation that in the flickering light, the images go back and forth. And it's just an astonishing thing. These are things that we thought, in fact, they're aspects of design and use of color that art historians thought were invented in the Renaissance 32,000 years ago. They were us. And so I think that these discoveries speak to, obviously, the origin of innovation and of our creative minds. They speak to our profound capacity for abstract reasoning and imagination and being able to think about things we can't see. They speak to, I was inspired by even the motto here of the library, ideas, imagination, and information. They speak to the ability to conceive of things and to pass them on to people. And I think perhaps more than anything to me, they speak to this, what is for people a universal yearning to understand what it means to be human. And so I hope that I've interested you in some of the ideas, not only in this research, but some of the ideas that you can explore in the exhibit. And I would just like to conclude very briefly with one final point, and that's one of the messages of the exhibit is, again, this question. And the idea is that research has certainly made discoveries about the origin of many of the things that distinguish human beings, Homo sapiens, from other forms of life. But the ways that we, all of us, understand the word human and try to understand our own humanity and ourselves go way beyond, often far beyond, what research in human evolution can study, even though the study of human evolution has provided some profound insights into who we are as a species. And so the exhibit Exploring Human Origins is an invitation, and I hope you'll find a real opportunity to ponder how our lives, that is the things that matter to us, and research discoveries about human evolution may meet and become acquainted with one another. Thanks very much.